All right. Let's turn that up a little bit. There we go. Okay. Let's get started here. Wow. So we are now. This is the last class of week 6, and week. It's a motion sensor. Yeah. Week 7 is obviously reading week. So I mean, we can I think happily say at this point we're almost halfway through the course in terms of weeks by the end of next week. So good times. Okay. Still working on your midterms. I will get there. I promise I will get there next week. For sure. I knew, looking at the many faces here, I knew no one was going to be here this morning the second I drove into my parking on campus, because usually it's quite packed and there were like no cars, so I get to pick wherever I wanted to park. So I was like, oh, it's one of those days. And I don't know if it's that, all the assignments are due or people have already left for their tropical or ski vacations. I'm not sure. But I get to stay. My wonderful vacation will be for reading week will be staying in my house and marking exams. So that's going to be fun. Okay, so we're talking about good jobs, right? We're in our kind of job quality unit, talking about what makes a good job. And we left off, with this slide, talking about the difference that unions make. And generally speaking, right, union workers make more money. Those in unions or professional associations make more money. They're more protected. And so unions and these kinds of things do tend to make what we think of as good jobs. But as we'll talk about later in the course, these are organizations that are increasingly embattled, especially as conservative jurisdictions try to make it easier for businesses to set up, and because they're competing fiercely for startups and factories and all of this stuff, they often set rules that make it hard for unions to exist. We'll talk about that more as we get through the course. Okay, so pretty obviously, right, the more educated you are, the higher your wages will be, to a sort of limit, right? 4-year undergraduate degree is the biggest jump, right? The jump from a high school education to a 4-year undergraduate degree gives you the biggest jump. The jumps afterwards get smaller and smaller, right? The jump for most industries from a bachelor's to a master's, it's still fairly large, but then a jump from a master's to a PhD generally isn't the biggest for most fields. Okay, and yeah, most occupations where there's or this is particularly true, when there's an occupation with a minimum level of education required, right? So things like, nursing, which requires at least a 4-year degree, teaching, a 4-year, I guess a 4 to 6 year degree, depending where you're looking, medicine, medical, an undergraduate degree, then medical school, then specialization, and things like engineering, right, where you have to have an engineering degree to get certified by groups like APEGA. All of these, are going to see higher earnings because they're controlled, right? They're sheltered labor markets where professional associations basically keep lower skilled workers out. And when you couple this with unions or professional associations, you can have dramatic results, right? These associations can negotiate far higher wages and benefits than would otherwise be expected based on, say, like for teaching, right? In Alberta, the minimum for teaching is a 4-year undergrad, a 4-year BEd. Most, and wages for teachers, especially as they move up, are considerably higher, though I'm sure no teacher will tell you this, or no teacher would feel this way. But they're considerably higher than a lot of other fields where, people have a 4-year undergraduate degree. Okay, so, this is just kind of generally true. Less training means lower wages, right? The easier it is to get into a profession, generally the lower the wages will be, right? Even trades where you generally need less training will pay less. So for example, a journeyman plumber can expect to make, over $100,000. A roofer, which requires basically no training, a roofer, you're going to see roofers making somewhere between 44 and like 66K at the max. The variation mostly comes in speed and efficiency. If you can be a really fast roofer, you can make more money because you can do more roofs. Okay. All right, gender wage gap, the much vaunted gender wage gap. Okay, so I'll say this from the social science data and from the economics data, the gender wage gap is both real and not real. You could call it the Schrodinger's wage gap. It kind of depends how you're looking at it. Okay, so if we look at women as a whole, right? We take women as a homogeneous group. Generally speaking, they do make less than their male counterparts, right? And it's something like for 81.2 cents on the dollar compared to male wages. Somewhat better than the US, where the comparison is 77 cents on the dollar, roughly, or 77% of male wages. Generally speaking, more skilled positions do tend to close this gap. So in, natural and applied sciences, it jumps about a little over 5%. It shrinks by about 5%. So women's wages are closer. Engineering, right, is an applied science, so it's about that. In teaching, right, and other education fields like professors, it's much closer to parity, about 91 cents on the dollar. Now, it's much worse when you go down into the lower tiers of the service sector, right? In retail, in Canada, right, it's 10% lower, right, than the national average. So in, kind of lower tiers of the service industry, it actually goes down. In trades, transportation, and equipment-related sectors, it's about 75 cents on the dollar, although there's almost no women in these sectors. There are very few and far between. And it has kind of shrunk over time, right? This used to be more like 66 cents on the dollar, or 66% of male wages, and it has shrunk considerably. Okay. So why this difference at all, right? Especially given that women's educational attainment is getting much closer to men's educational attainment. Why would there be a gap at all? Okay, so the biggest reasons, well, there's a couple of them, and I'll throw them out there. I'll tell you as much as I can on this, and we'll go from there. Okay. So women are far more likely, in the parenting relationship, for most couples, are much more likely to be the ones that are dividing their time between childcare and work, right? So if one person has to leave work early to go pick up little Tanya and take her to her piano recital, it's much more likely to be mom, right? And if kids are sick, right? If little Jimmy is puking all over the place and you have to decide which parent is staying home, it's much more likely to be mom that stays home than dad. Okay, so as a consequence, when you look at people in similar positions, right, men and women occupying similar positions, on average, men work more hours per week than their female counterparts, right? Women work on average 38 hours a week, and men work on average 44 hours a week. So just there, right, in non-salaried, in wage positions, that's a difference of 6 hours a week, which just right there, you're going to see, a difference in earned wages. Now, another thing that women tend to do is, obviously for biological reasons, right, when they have children, they are more likely to take time out of the workforce to raise those children. So what ends up happening, right, is if you had two people, a man We're going to be very, very, very stereotypical in our drawings here. And a woman, right, who started on the same day at the same company. She has 2 children, 2 little people. Boop. And so she takes 2 years off on maternity leave, right? 2 years off. So when it comes time for promotion, technically speaking, right, Jim from accounting has 2 extra years of experience. So Jim is more likely to move up the corporate ladder more quickly, right? Because he's not going to take that extra time off. So, basically, and this is mostly what's happening now, these 2 people are starting off at roughly the same wage, but this person is moving up the wage ladder faster because he's putting in more hours. So, and bosses notice these kinds of things, so he's more likely to get promoted. And when, Tina takes time off of work to go on parental leave, he's still accruing experience while she is not, right? Which again puts him a little bit ahead. Okay, so that is, that's probably the biggest reason, and one of the reasons that women continue to be the ones that take parental leave, despite the fact that it's offered now to either spouse, either parent can take parental leave. There's obviously some biological things, right? When children are really little, they're doing things like breastfeeding, right, which only works with one parent. But also, on average, and this is especially true, in the working class, less true in the professional class or the white collar class, but in the working class, men, the kind of jobs that men do tend to make more money, right? So it doesn't make sense for the male partner to take time off of work because, especially in Canada, the way even parental leave is structured is you get, 55% of your wage, because it's administered through EI, right? It's actually not given by your employer at all. It's administered through the employment insurance system. You get 55% of your wage, but I think that tops out at $700 a week, if I recall. I could be wrong about that number. That's what it was when my wife was on maternity leave, but that was now 5 years ago. So it's been a spell, and those numbers do fluctuate. So a lot of people make more than $700 a week. So, mostly like this was nowhere close. This 55% of wages was nowhere close to replacing my wife's wages when she was on maternity leave. So things could get pretty tight. Okay. The other reason that there is a wage gap, if we look in aggregate. All right, those don't want to disappear. We're going to have to just live with it. Okay, the other big reason is types of employment. So, obviously, I think people in this room, for the most part, are often, especially the women in this room or in this class, are an exception. But women, still generally speaking, tend to cluster in a few fields. So at the high end of the service industry, again, where most people are employed, teaching, nursing, and social services. Where they go into fields like business, right? They're much more likely to be in administration rather than, say, in finance. Okay. Now, men will tend to go into fields like, our STEM fields. In the high end of the service industry, our STEM fields, right, our biotech, our engineering, our math, our science-intensive fields. And when we talk about business, in finance, right, where you can make a lot of money. So men's employment tends to be in fields that are scalable, and women's tends to be in fields that are non-scalable, and often public sector. Okay, so again, what does this mean? So scalable means that, at least theoretically, you could scale up these industries, right, or anything that you do in these industries massively, right? So if you're, let's say you're working in a pharmaceutical lab, right? You're working in biotech, and you create magic drug. We won't call it Ozempic, we'll just call it magic drug. So you create magic drug, right? And it cures diabetes, it causes extreme weight loss, it makes bald men's hair regrow, right? It's just the best thing ever. So, thank you for laughing at that joke, by the way. What you can do then is you can make a lot of it, right? You make lots, you produce a ton of it, you license it, you push it through doctors' offices. And so the amount of money that you can make, from this is a ton, right? You can scale it up. It's scalable, right? Or if you design, a piece of software, you can sell that software, you can make huge sales, you can scale up, right? You can increase, how much oil is being extracted. You can, in finance, you can come up with different ways of manipulating the financial system to make lots of money. Now, if you are a nurse, right, the number of patients that you can see is limited. There's really no way to scale up the number of patients, because patients are going to take a bunch of time, and you never know how much time is going to be taken by a patient, right? So you can only see so many patients in a day, right? Same thing with a teacher. The number of students is limited. You can only teach so many students, right? If you're an elementary school teacher, at about 30 students in a classroom, the whole thing breaks down. And so it's not like you could ever be, like, oh, we're going to charge more per student and make more money, because there's limits on how much you can, how many students you can serve in an effective and, a meaningful way. So these are non-scalable positions, right? No matter what you do, there are actual limits to how much you can achieve based on your skill set. So these are all public sector jobs, usually because they're kind of non-market, right? You're not charging per student, you're being paid a salary to teach, because there's no way that, even if you went into the private market, there's no way you could scale it. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. So when you're in a scalable industry, your possibility of making a lot more money is there, right? You could work for a company that, their value just explodes, and maybe you're rewarded with stock options. I don't know, that's a pretty common one, right? Stock options or bonuses or whatever, because the company made a lot. So you will do really well there, and the amount of money you make is going to be considerably higher than someone that's in a non-scalable industry, potentially. So, okay. No questions. All right, good times. Okay, I tried redesigning some of these slides so I have more room to write, because I write a lot, apparently. Okay, so we talk about our highest and lowest wages, who earns the highest wages, who earns the lowest wages. Okay, so surprising to no one, CEOs of companies, right, or C-suite executives, so your CEO, your CFO, sometimes your CTO as well, are going to be the ones making the most money. And the average compensation, that's actually a little while ago, for a top 100, a CEO of a top 100 company on the TSX, right, the Toronto Stock Exchange, was about $7.7 million a year. Now that's before bonuses, right? A lot of these cats also earn big giant bonuses and lots of extra money. so our top 50 CEOs, so from the top 50 TSX listed companies, make 253 times more than the average income in Canada. And the average income is about, I think it's about 46,000 in Canada, somewhere thereabouts. So our top 50 CEOs, on average make 235 times more than that. So it is a metric ton of money. And that's increased, 85 times since 1995. Really what seems to have happened is, here we can talk neoliberalism. Bless you. Neoliberalism and its kind of return in the 80s and 90s really kind of set this free, right? There were sort of, in a sense, kind of moral and public limitations on how much a CEO could make, right? Companies where the CEO made disproportionately more than the average employees were generally seen in a pretty negative light, right? And there'd be a backlash against it. But in the 1980s and 90s, right, we got this slogan from Milton Friedman, greed is good. And then actually, right, this kind of absurdity ultimately would lead to better companies that were better run, right? How could you compete and get the best CEOs, the ones that are likely to make your company super awesome, if you couldn't pay them a competitive wage in this increasingly competitive marketplace? So CEO salaries have gone up and up and up and up into kind of the stratosphere. This has obviously worsened income inequality and especially leads to very negative comparisons, with the average wages of their workers. So this, places like, say, Walmart, tend to get the worst of this. Walmart, in Canada, Loblaws, where, the CEOs will make these multi-million-dollar salaries per year, and most of the employees are part-time workers making minimum wage, right? So they've tended to get really negative kind of backlash, although for whatever reason, and possibly because, these big chains and big companies got so dominant in the marketplace, it hasn't led to a backlash, say, against Walmart. Okay. In Canada, our regulated minimum wage varies from province to province, but it doesn't matter which province you're in, the minimum wage is relatively low and rising much slower than the rate of inflation, especially in the last 3-4 years. So there's an increasing disconnect between those making, these massive salaries at the top and at the bottom. And sometimes this plays out in really stupid ways, right? The case of Sears of Canada, right, which no longer exists. But basically, the average Sears worker was making minimum wage. The CEO, I think, was making $10.8 million. The company went bankrupt. All these minimum wage workers lost their jobs and benefits, and the CEO got something like a $3 million bonus. And I'm a pretty smart guy, I think, but I've never quite been able to figure out why driving a company into the ground entitles you to some kind of bonus on your way out the door, or how a bankrupt company is paying anyone $3 million. But, maybe I'm just not good at business, but it's never quite made sense to me. And it's like, oh, well, he negotiated in his contract that, if he got fired from the job, he got this, what they call a golden parachute. And I'm like, yeah, but the company has no money, so where is that coming from? So, fun times. Okay. Another aspect of job quality, and an important one, is benefits. Okay. So when we think of benefits, right, what we're talking about is essentially a form of indirect pay. So, you get dental benefits, or you get vision, or you get a discretionary health spending fund, right? Or whatever it is that you happen to get, right? It could look like all sorts of things. Paid vacation, sick leave, medical leave, dental care, disability leave, life insurance, a private pension plan, or maternity and paternity leave. One of the things that also, a lot of employers now, especially as you see many more kind of highly educated and skilled women entering the workforce, is maternity top-up. Right, that this is being negotiated into contracts. So I know, because my wife's a teacher, right, and we have 3 kids, I think it was, so again, because you get 55% of your wage up to a certain amount under EI, right, they would top this up to, I think it was 100% for the first 14 weeks, right, that you're off on maternity leave. My wife's cousin, who works as an accountant or in finance in oil and gas, right, hers was much more generous. It was up to 100% for 52 weeks, right? So basically, her full wage while she was on maternity leave with her 2 kids, right? So these are all things, these are benefits, right? And basically, forms of kind of, incentivization. Often, especially with private sector employers, things that can be negotiated, paid vacation, right? Like I said, my sister took extra paid vacation for less salary. And it is, generally a way to induce good employees to come and then to stay. And let me tell you, like, even if you work in a place with good benefits, even if you don't necessarily like that job, it can be really hard to leave because the benefits are so good. I've had several friends stay in jobs that they were done with, like they didn't want to be there anymore, because they're like, this one has 6 weeks vacation, and if I went to a different job, I'd have to go back to 4 weeks vacation, right, and then earn those 2 weeks back and this kind of stuff. So benefits can be a big deal. Okay. They, roughly speaking, account for about 1/3 of total labor costs in Canada, right? So the money that your employer pays for, to employ people, about 1/3 of their total cost is paid for benefits packages, right? Especially medical, dental, those are the big ones. All of your pharmacy, right, or your drug coverage, all of that goes in there. And yeah, it varies quite a bit across occupations and work status. And obviously our full-time workers, full-time private sector workers, high status professionals, unionized workers, all tend to have better access to better benefits. Although weirdly, sometimes there are weird things. I know there are aspects of like the university professor's plan that actually really stinks. But most of it is quite good. Okay. For a while, it was like there was no mental health care at all. It was like you could not see a psychologist on your benefits. It was interesting. They negotiated that in eventually. But it was like, do we have health benefits for this? No. Your mental health is not important to the university, if you ever wondered. Okay, why your professors are all crazy. So, yeah, our older, better educated workers are more likely to receive benefits. And our, lower tier service sector, especially retail, but hospitality as well. Childcare often have no benefits or very minimal benefits. Right? So, I mean, my one friend, I'll tell you all about my friends eventually. I'll tell you about all my friends. He's a plumber, and his now ex-wife was working, or is, I think she's still working part-time at Michael's. Even for 2 years after they got separated, he left her on his benefits because otherwise, she had basically no benefits. And so out of the goodness of his heart, which I was like, no, cut that bitch off, but whatever, he didn't listen to me. He lived at my house for 6 months with us. It was very awkward. And I'm like, okay, seriously, like, enough of this. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It was a big deal because her job simply didn't offer benefits. So she would have had rotting teeth and stuff. And I'm like, I don't know why that's your problem, but whatever. Okay, so there we go. If you can tell how I feel about her. I did warn her not to marry. I did warn him not to marry her, but he didn't listen because she was pretty, I guess. There you go. Okay, occupational status. Status matters, right? And I think I said we are status-seeking machines. I don't know. I talk about this in a lot of classes, so I can't remember if it was this one. Your status matters, right? So what makes a good job? The status of the job might be something to be held up as valuable, right? All right, I'll give you the example of me. I'll stop talking about my friends, right? So I'm a professor. Now, because I am a professor, I think this is way less impressive than other people do. Because I know too many professors and I know, too much about how the university works. But whatever. When I tell people that I am a professor, I generally get kind of oohs and ahs, right? Oh, wow, you're a professor? It's like, yeah, whatever. No big deal. Same thing with a lot of other generally high status professors or professions, not professors, right? Why do people want to be doctors? I speak here specifically of MDs, right? Not my kind of doctor. Though it is prestigious, it's less prestigious than this one. Well, a lot of it is around status, right? A lot of it is because being a doctor carries a lot of status. Why do people want to be dentists? Probably the same reason, right? Why would you rather be an engineer than a lot of other things? Well, I think at least part of it probably comes down to the fact that when you tell someone that you're an engineer, it carries some degree of status, right? So I think, I guess think about it this way. When you tell people that you are studying engineering, what kind of reactions do you get? And does that make you happy? Versus imagine if you told them that you were studying something lesser, like what? Let me think. Let's say drama, right? If you were studying drama, how do you think, would your parents take you out to meet their friends and be like, hi, this is my son, Tim. He's studying drama. Or do you think they'd be happier to be like, this is my son, Tim. He's studying engineering, right? Which one? I mean, you're all engineers, so I presume you made that choice at least partially because you didn't want to embarrass your parents by being, introduced as studying drama. Okay, so obviously, right, they're prestigious positions and that status matters. Now, obviously, it might not be the same, for janitors, sales clerks, people working in car rental and this kind of thing. I mean, I remember, I was working at Enterprise Rent-A-Car, more on that later. And I remember, meeting friends, like it was the time where a lot of my friends from high school were getting married. And so every wedding was kind of like a little mini high school reunion. And people are like, oh yeah, what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I work at this car rental company. And I can guarantee you no one was like, oh, that's so great. Everyone's like, oh, okay, that's good for you. It was not good. So finally, at one of these weddings, I was like, okay, I'm done with this. I'm going to go do my master's and I'm going back to school. I'm going to get a high status profession so that the next time I bump into this girl I had a huge crush on in high school, I don't have to be embarrassed about what I do. And that's how I got here. Okay, so higher status occupations also tend to have higher pay, which is also good. Sometimes these statuses are also related to gender norms. Definitely women working in typically male professions will often carry a pretty high status, right? Especially things like medicine and the law, being really successful in those fields as a woman will tend to carry a lot of status as well. Okay, I was burning through slides today. I still have many to go, but we'll see how we do. Okay, ooh. These are interesting questions. Do I think that 4-day work week trial? Okay, so I don't know how to answer these first. How much of that 7.7 million CEO compensation is stock issuance versus salaries? It really depends on what corporation you're working for. And in certain cases, like say you were working for Sears, you definitely wouldn't want to be paid in stock, and you would probably negotiate that because that stock is not going anywhere good. So it depends on the industry. In tech, It's almost all in stock issuance. But I mean, I have my one friend who works for a kind of mid-sized oil company in Calgary, and she said when they offered her stock as compensation, she said absolutely not. She's like, these companies come and go, and owning part of this company, she suspected, was going to be a bad investment in the long term, and so she just wanted to be paid kind of cash. Now, she's not a C-suite executive, but people will negotiate that differently. Okay, why does Europe have a much longer paid vacation period compared to the US, with Canada being somewhere in between? What drives these differences? So they're mostly cultural. In Europe, okay, but how to put this? Europe is a complete economic mess. And part of it is some of these benefits. Like, I know it sounds really good, but if you look at productivity numbers between the US and Europe, Europe is massively unproductive for the most part. Countries like France, oh my God, France, Spain, even Germany. Germany's not as bad, but a lot of these countries where you have these really long vacation periods, right? Everyone is gone for the entire month of August in France, like nothing works. These countries are hugely economically unproductive, right? So it's a cultural thing, but it's actually really bad for the economy. If you care about the economy, that's a problem. If you think people should have long vacations and you don't care about productivity, it's not. But it does tend to lead to a lower standard of living. Okay, do I think 4-day workweek trials we keep hearing about in the news will catch on? Do they have merit? They do not. Okay, so the one problem with these is the same thing as the long vacations, is they tend to have really negative effects on productivity, right? What you see is dives in productivity when you have 4-day work weeks, right? So because people are working less, right? They're not going to fit in more work into the hours that they are there during the week. Even if you increase the hours to like 10 hours a day, 4 days a week, the fatigue comes in, you don't accomplish as much. So you actually produce less economic benefit, which over time makes these systems less sustainable and puts pressure on things like social services because tax revenues struggle and all of this kind of stuff. So, I mean, I don't want to be all neoliberal on you. I just think the 4-day work week is kind of a bad idea. And everywhere it's been tried, it's kind of a disaster. Okay, where was I? Okay, here. All right, 12 minutes. Okay, so non-standard work, right? So our standard work is our full-time, full year work. Non-standard work has a bunch of different forms. Part-time work, obviously, is a form of kind of what we consider non-standard work. Holding multiple jobs, right? Another non-standard form of work, and usually what this looks like for the most part is you're full-time at one job and part-time at another. Or sometimes, it can be part-time at many, part-time at 2 or more jobs. Okay. Self-employed, obviously, is a non-standard form of work. We'll talk about self-employed more as we go. But there's a form of self-employment called own account, right, where you're the only employee. You work alone. So you work in a small business of one. These are actually really common. And then temporary work and gig work increasingly, so that's like Skip or Skip the Dishes or Uber Eats or Uber in general, right? These kinds of things. But there's lots of different forms, even in kind of skilled professions. There's things like Fiverr where you can go and buy like graphic design and all sorts of fun stuff. Okay, lots of different forms. Okay, so why do these arrangements exist? Why are we seeing them grow? Well, part of it is increasing kind of economic difficulties have caused a lot of employers to try and replace full-time permanent positions with part-time workers. A lot of it goes to this big cost, right? I said, a moment ago that 1/3 of total employment costs are those secondary benefits, right? Are things like vacation and healthcare costs. A lot of employers, to try and get around paying as much of this as possible, try to find workarounds for it. I talked last class about how, like, in the construction industry, hiring people not as employees but as like independent contractors is super common. And again, it's all around getting around this big number that 1/3 of your employment costs end up being these secondary benefits. So yeah, when you want a company like, say, a Walmart. Okay, actually, let me tell you this historically. My Aunt Marg, this is a real person. I'm not making her up, I swear. I won't tell you details about her. She's gone down. She's been red pilled somehow, but that's neither here nor there. So she worked for Sears. That was her career, starting in 1974, right? And there, she was a full-time employee at Sears in their vacuum department, right? Vacuums. So she would be in the vacuum repair shop, and she's the one who handled the appointments to bring. I know you in the past you could actually fix small appliances, right? You didn't just, like, your vacuum broke, you didn't just throw it away and buy a new one. You actually got things fixed. I know it's revolutionary. If only it still worked this way, right? So she worked full time in a vacuum repair shop, and she got benefits and pension, right? And all that stuff. And she worked there in that job for, about 30 years until 2004. Now, a company like, Sears, if it existed, or Walmart, doesn't want to be responsible or on the hook for pension and benefits. So they moved everybody at Sears. Now, they couldn't fire her because she was already an employee. So, in 2004, they gave her a very modest buyout package to get her to leave and take her benefits and pension, and basically replaced her with part-time workers, right? Part-time workers, people who worked under 35 hours a week so that they didn't qualify for benefits. And this became really, really common, right? Retailers that used to pay, good salaries to people to work there who were knowledgeable and skilled, started to pay less and less, and basically, eventually, all of those jobs went away to be replaced by part-time workers, with no benefits at all. Now, again, this is just for the benefit of the corporations, basically to improve their bottom line. Didn't work at Sears, but they had a screwy old schooly business style or business model. But that is generally why, you don't see very many full-time employees at, say, a place like Walmart. For the average Walmart, you probably have maybe 15 full-time employees at the average, and Walmarts are huge, right? So you have probably like 10 managers that work different shifts, and then a couple of full-time pharmacists that work full-time in the pharmacy, and everyone else is part-time, maybe 20 at the outside, but there can be hundreds of people working at your average Walmart. Okay, sometimes replaced with limited term contracts, right? You see this a lot in academia, actually. I mean, that was basically me from 2017 when I got my PhD until 2024. I was on a series of 1-year contracts, right? Basically, I would be employed for 1 year at a time through that period. Now I am permanently and gainfully employed. It's super fun. I have tenure. I can say whatever I want. No one can fire me. I don't say whatever I want, but I could. Okay, so lots of that in academia and other fields, right? Limited term contracts. Temporary workers in Canada, right? A lot of temporary foreign workers have become really popular, but also summer students, right? This is a form of temporary worker that people bring in the summer, especially in construction industries and agriculture to work. Now, the argument for why, we have these things is employers, if they have temporary employees and things like that, part-time employees, people that don't have the same standards in which that you have to respect in terms of hiring and firing, basically companies can better match, market conditions, right? If they have more demand, they hire a few temporary workers. If demand goes down, they can reduce it, right? So it reduces their cost and increases their ability to navigate the market, right? The more full-time employees you have that have benefits that you would have to, maybe pay severance to, the less you're going to be able to navigate the vicissitudes of the market. Okay, about 5% of Canadian workers hold 2 jobs. At one point, I held 4. I don't know if that matters. No one ever asked me on a survey, so probably not. It was fun holding 4 jobs. Okay, 30% of multiple job holders are self-employed in one, right? So this is my dad growing up. He had his own business that he worked at in the evening, and then he had, his day job that he worked kind of 9 to 5. Only 10% are self-employed in both, right? Maybe you have 2 companies. I actually have a friend, he's super rich and he has lots of companies and he's the CEO of lots of them, right? So I think he has 4 companies, like a developer, an engineering company, a industrial fans company, and I forget what the other one is, but he would be counted in this category, right? Because he's the CEO of all of them. And then, the construction industry has the largest number of non-standard employees, typically self-employed or contract workers, right? And it depends on the size and scale of the jobs that the construction industry is doing, right? Lots of times, for small projects, they'll just hire out, someone they know who runs their own one-person shop as an electrician or a plumber or whatever. Okay. Can I do this in 3 minutes? And we'll come back in over a week and get back to this. Okay. So, pre-1996, according to StatsCan, we define someone full-time who worked 30 hours or more per week. They changed the definition of it in 1996 to be 30 hours a week or more at their main job, right? So if you work 2 jobs, so here, you would have been full-time if you had 2 jobs or 3 jobs and you worked 30 hours plus, you would have been considered full-time. Now it is, if you have 2 or 3 jobs, you have to be, employed for 30 hours or more at your whatever you consider your main job, right? Okay. And the number of people working part-time has increased radically over time, right? Only 4% in 1953. By 1976, it's 13. And by 1993, right, it jumped to almost 20%. And it kind of hovers around 18 or 19% at any given time. Okay. Can I do this? I don't know why. No, let's not. I'll stop. Pack in as much as I can, but we made good progress. We'll finish this up the Monday we get back from reading week, and then we'll be on to the next unit. So let's leave it there. We'll stop. We'll pick it up on Monday after reading week. Have an absolutely lovely break. I'm sure all of you are taking tropical vacations and don't have 1,000 assignments to work on during the break. So enjoy Mexico. Say hi to it for me. I haven't been there in 15 years, so I'm kidding. I know you're not going to Mexico. I assume you're all working. So